Hey everybody, thanks for clicking on this video. Today we're going to be practicing rational root theorem and finding the zeros of a polynomial. If you want to follow along, the links to the companion worksheet are in the description below. So let's get started. So we're going to be using synthetic division to figure out if these are zeros, but first we need a list of possibilities. And what rational root theorem says is you look at the last number, 1, and you say, all right, what are all the factors of 1? Well, really, plus 1 or minus 1. Then you look at 6 and say, what are all the factors of 6? Well, it could be 1, 2, 3, or 6. And so what do we get when we divide these numbers up here by these numbers down here? Well, we get plus or minus 1, 1/2, 1/3, or 1/6. So we have some possibilities here, but remember, this is a degree 3. And since it's degree 3, that means only 3 of these could possibly work. So let's try the easy ones. Let's try 1. So we have 6, 0, -5, and -1. So bring down the 6 times 6 is 6. 0 plus 6 is 6 times 1 is 6. -6 and 5 is 1 times 1 is 1. And right off the bat, we've got a 0 because we got a remainder. So this means we're left with x minus 1 and 6x squared plus 6x plus 1. That's what we're left with. We were able to pull out a 1 there. So all we have to do is figure out what zeros go into this. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what's left over, 6x squared plus 6x plus 1. Let's try something else. Let's try -1. 6, 6, and 1. Bring down the 6 times -1 is -6, which is 0. And then we get 0, 1. So nope, that did not work. So let's try 1/2. All right, so 6, 6, and 1. So bring down the 6 times 1/2 is 3. 6 and 3 is 9. And that's 4.5. That's 5.5. So nope, 1/2, not going to work. How about -1/2? So 6, 6, and 1. Bring down the 6 times -1/2 is -3. 6 and 3 make +3 times -1/2 is -3 halves. So that's -1/2. So nope, -1/2. Not going to work. So what about 1/3? So 6, 6, and 1. Bring down the 6 times 1/3 is 2. 6 and 2 is 8. 8 times 1/3 is 8/3. So that's 11/3. So nope, that's not going to work. -1/3. See if that works. So 6, 6, and 1. So we have 6 times 1/3 is -1/3 is 2. So that brings 4. So -4/3 is -1/3 is our remainder. Nope. Again, we want a remainder of 0. So we have 1/6 now. So 6, 6, and 1. So we have 6, remainder of 1. 6 and 1 makes 7. So that's 7/6. So nope, that doesn't work. So that leaves us with -1/6. So we have 6, 6, and 1. 6 times -6 is -1, makes 5. So -5/6. So then that is 1/6. So no, that didn't work. So the only thing that worked was 1. That was the only rational root. And so this quadratic is going to give us irrational roots. But because this is rational root theorem, this is all we're going to talk about in this video. So let's go on to the next one. So this one, here we want all the factors of 14. So plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 7 plus or minus 14. Then on the bottom, plus or minus 1 plus or minus 3. So when we divide them, what do we get? Plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 7, plus or minus 14. If I take all these and divide by 1, this is what I get. Then if I take all these and divide by 3, I get this. Plus or minus a third, plus or minus 2/3, plus or minus 7/3, plus or minus 14/3. All right. And usually we like to start with the integers. Easier, so we'll start with 1. So 3, -7, 6, and -14. So bring down the 3. Times 1 is 3. -7 and 3 is -4. Times 1, -4. 6 and -4 is +2. 1 and 2 is 2. We get -12. That is not a 0, but notice it's telling us something. We saw that in the previous video. When we see a plus minus like that, this is telling us that this number is too low. So 1 is too low. Well, if 1 is too low, so is -1. So is -2, so is -7, so is -14. And along with that, let's see. Well, if 1 is too low, then so are all these negatives right here. And so is +1/3, so is +2/3. So we were able to knock out quite a few zeros just by doing one of them. So if you think you have to guess and check every single one, no. If you know how to use those upper and lower bounds, that's going to help you a lot. So let's try 2. So 3, -7, 6, -14. Bring down the 3, times 2 is 6. -7 plus 6 is -1. 2 times -1 is -2. 6 and -2 make 4. 4 times 2 is 8, which is -6. So -2 didn't work either. Okay. And it's also telling us that it's too low. Plus minus plus minus. So we know -2 doesn't work. So what are we left with? 7/14, 7/3, and 14/3. Those are the only ones left for us to try out. So let's try 7. 3, -7, 6, -14. All right. So 7 times 3 is 21. 7 and 21 make 14. Let's see. 14 times 7 is 98. That is getting quite large quite quickly. So 104 times 7 is 728. Now that is definitely not 0, but notice, take a look. All the numbers down below are positive. So that's telling us that 7 is too big. So if 7 is too big, so is 14. So we're down to just two numbers, 7/3 or 14/3. Now, how many numbers do we have to start with? We have 16 numbers right here. And we've only done synthetic division 3 times. And just by doing it 3 times, we've already eliminated all but 2. We've eliminated 14 of our possibilities. So not bad. So 7/3, let's try that. 3, -7, 6, -14. Bring down the 3. Times 7 times 7/3 gives us 7. Well, those cancel out. Times 0 is 0, 6, and that is 14, which actually works. Now remember, in the previous video, when we talked about synthetic division, these are all factors of 0. So, instead of writing this, instead of writing x minus 7/3 times 3x squared plus 6, we're going to write it like this. 3x minus 7. I'm pulling a 3 out of here and putting it over here. X squared plus 2. Now, x squared plus 2 is a quadratic that will never equal 0. So we can stop hunting for zeros. 7/3 is the only one that works for this one. All right. So the next one, here we've got 9. So let's see, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 9 on the top. And then on the bottom, we have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. So if I take all these numbers and divide by 1, then I get plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 9. Then if I take all these numbers and divide by 2, then I get plus or minus 1/2, plus or minus 3/2, plus or minus 9/2. So we got quite a list here. Got 12 possibilities. And let's see, let's start with 1 again. So we have 2, -1, -9, and +9. So bring down the 2. Times 1 is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. Times 1 is 1. Minus 9 is -8. And then -8, that gives us a remainder of 1. And that's inconclusive. It's not all positive, and it's not plus minus plus minus. So that one didn't work, unfortunately. What about -1? So 2, -1, -9, and 9. Bring down the 2. Times -1 is -2, which is -3. -3 times -1, that is +3. -9 and 3 is -6. -6 and 1 is +6, which is 15. And that didn't work. And that either is not a plus minus plus minus. Okay. So let's try the 3. So 2, -1, -9, and 9. Bring down the 2. Times 3 is 6. -1 and 6 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. -9 and 15 is 6. 6 and 3 make 18. 18 and 9 is 27. That is not a 0, but all these numbers are positive. So that tells us that 3 doesn't work. We already got rid of those. 3 doesn't work, but it's too big, which means 9 also won't work. So let's try -3. So 2, -1, -9, +9. Bring down the 2. Times -3 is -6. Add these two to get -7. Multiply them to get 21. 21 minus 9, that's going to be 12. 12 times -3 is -36, and that's -27. And here, doesn't work, but we got a plus minus plus minus going on. So -3 doesn't work, and it's too low. So now we have to venture into the fractions. Now notice I'm staying in the middle because I want to leave myself open to the possibility of crossing a few of these out, either finding them to be too high or too low. So let's try 1/2. So 2, -1, -9, and 9. So bring down the 2. Times 1/2 is 1. And that makes 0. 0 times 1/2 is 0. So -9. -9 is negative. So that's -4.5, which is 4.5. So 1/2 does not work. So what about -1/2? So that's 2, -1, -9, and 9. Bring down the 2. Times -1/2 is -1. Bring those down. So that's -2. Times -1/2 is +1. Bring those two down. That's -8. Times 1/2, that is +4. And that's 13. So -1/2 doesn't work. So the next option is 3/2. So 2, -1, -9, and 9. Bring down the 2. Times 3/2 is 3. -1 plus 3 is +2. Times 3/2 is 3. -9 plus 3 is -6. Times 3/2 is -9. There we go. Found one that worked. So negative 3 halves. Now again, instead of x minus 3 halves, and x and 2x squared plus 2x minus 6, instead we're going to pull the 2 over to here. 2x minus 3, we have x squared plus x minus 6. Okay. All right. And that quadratic can then factor, and yet somehow, which is weird, x plus 3, we tried negative 3, must have made a mistake, and x minus 2. I'm unsure about how that one came about. 2, 2, 3. So, I may have to fix that in the comments in a second. All right, so for the last one, here we've got 12 plus or minus 1 plus or minus 2 plus or minus 3 plus or minus 4 plus or minus 6 plus or minus 12. Then we've got plus or minus 1 plus or minus 2 plus or minus 3 plus or minus 4. Nope, not plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6. So here we've got quite a list to go on. So if I divide them all by 1, I get plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 12. Now if I take all these and divide by 2, now you think I'm going to get a whole more list of numbers, but actually I'm not. Because 2 divided by 2 is 1. Got that already. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Got that. 6 divided by 2 is 3. We've got it. 12 divided by 2 is 6. We've already got it. The only two numbers this is going to add is 1/2 and 3/2. Then if I divide these by 3, 3/3 is 1. 6/3 is 2. 12/3 is 4. So the only new numbers this is going to add is 1/3, 2/3, and 4/3. And then if I divide all these numbers by 6, 2/6 is 1/3. Got it. 3/6 is 1/2. Got it. 4/6 is 2/3. We've got it. So the only new number this one adds is 1/6. All right. Now here, this is degree 4. So that means I should find 4 different zeros. Or I could have zeros that repeat. But let's start with simple. Let's start with 1. So we have 6, -1, 6, -1, -12. So bring down the 6 times 6. That makes 5. Times 1 is 5. That's 11. Times 1 is 11, which is 10. Times 1 is 10. So we get -2. So that does not work. And unfortunately, it's not all positive. So this is not an upper bound. So close, but it's not. So let's try -1. So bring down the 6, which is multiplied by -1 is -6. So we get -7 times -1 is 7, which is 13. -13 is -14 times 1, which is 14, which is 2. Aha! So here we go. Plus, minus, plus, minus, plus. Right there. -1 is too small. So that means anything less than -1, we're not going to look at. So that gets rid of quite a few of these numbers right off the bat. So now let's try 2. So bring down the 6, times 2 is 12, which is 11, times 2 is 22, so that's 28, 56, that's 55, so that's 110, and now we've got something. 110 minus 12 is 98. Now look here, all of these numbers are all positive. So 2 is too big. So that means 3 is too big, 4 is too big, 6 is too big, 12 is too big, anything bigger than 2. All right, so that leaves us pretty much with just some of our fractions. So let's try 1/2. Bring down the 6, times 1/2 is 3. 3 and -1 is 2, times 1/2 is 1. 6 and 1 is 7, so that's 7/2. So that's 3.5, so that's 2.5. And that's not going to work. So we can stop right there. And if you know it's not going to work and it's not going to tell you anything, just stop. Doesn't help. So let's try -1/2. 6, -1, 6, -1, -12. Bring down the 6 times -1/2 is -3. -1 and -3, that makes -4. Times -1/2 is +2. 6 and 2 is 8. 8 times 1/2 is -4. So then that's -5. And that makes 2.5. And that is a negative, which doesn't work. So let's move on to 3/2. So we have 6, -1, -6, -1, and -12. Bring down the 6. Times 3/2 is 9. 9 and 1 make 8. Times 3/2 is 12. 6 and 12 is 6. That's 9 again. So we get 8. 8 times 3/2 is 12. There we go. 3/2 works. So remember, these are all factorable by 2. So instead of this, 6x cubed plus 8x squared plus 6x plus 8. Instead, we're going to move a 2 over. So we have 2x minus 3. So we have 3x cubed plus 4x squared plus 3x plus 4. And at this point, we can just factor this by grouping, because both of these are going to group the same way. I can take out an x squared here, and I can take out a 1 here. And this leaves me with 3x plus 4, and this leaves me with 3x plus 4. So this is going to factor into 2x minus 3, 3x plus 4, and x squared plus 1. So the other one was -4/3. If you have any questions or you see any mistakes, type them in the comments below or send me an email.